I'm on the ranch for sale. It seems like I have lost everything, but I know that all is well. All is well if he sends me to hell. I still love him anyway, and I'll always love him right to the end, even to my dying day, even to my dying day. William Marion Branham, some called him Brother Bill. He was born April the 6th, 1909, at 5 o'clock in the morning, in a little log cabin near Burkesville, Kentucky. The morning of his birth, the old midwife washed the baby and put it in the arms of its mother. She walked over to open up the little wooden window of the cabin so the young mother could see her firstborn. As she opened the window, there was an old robin sitting by the side of a little bush, just singing for all that was in him. Brother Bill always loved robins. Upon opening this window, a supernatural light come whirling in and went down on the bed where the little mother was holding her baby in her arms. When this child was 18 months old, he saw his first vision from God. At 7 years old, he was packing water from a well one warm September afternoon. And as he was walking up the lane, he heard a whirlwind that was caught in a poplar tree about halfway up. He looked up at it, and an audible voice spoke these words to him: "Don't ever smoke or drink or defile your body in any way. There will be a work for you to do when you get older." In his early 20s, he gave his heart to God and later began to preach the gospel of Christ. At age 23, he was ordained by Dr. Roy Davis in the Missionary Baptist Church and was made a local elder for the church at Jeffersonville, Indiana. In June of 1933, he was baptizing 500 converts from his first revival. After baptizing the 17th person, the same pillar of fire that led Israel through the wilderness come right down over where he was standing and said, "As John the Baptist was sent forth to forerun the first coming of Christ, your message shall cover the earth and forerun the second coming of Christ." A little later on after this, he was married to a Christian girl named Hope Brumback. As time went on, one day he was returning home from a fishing trip in Michigan. As he crossed the Mishawaka River, he saw a great number of people gathering for a meeting. That's where he got acquainted with the Pentecostal people. They were quite demonstrative, and all this was a little new to him. They began singing, "I know it was the blood, I know it was the blood." Everybody began clapping their hands, and he said, "I wonder what kind of people are these?" Pretty soon a bishop got up and began to preach on the baptism of the Holy Ghost. The longer he preached, the more he was convinced that maybe there was something to this. Then somebody started speaking in tongues, and a woman come running as hard as she could. Then they all got up to running. But you know, the longer he sat there, the better he liked it. There was something seemed to be real good. That night he prayed pretty near all night and said, "Lord, what is this I got into? I never seen such religious people in my life. Help me to know what this is all about. Lord, if these are the people that I have always wanted to find, that seem so happy and free, you give me favor before them." And God granted that request For the next morning at the meeting, he was asked to come to the platform to bring the morning message.
Come on up, Mr. Brandon. We want you to bring the message. Oh, my. For all them preachers. All them people. And I went slipping up, my face red, my ears burning. And I slipped up seersucker trousers and T-shirts. Preacher. Baptist preacher going up to the microphone. Never seen one before, you see. I stood up there. I said, well, I don't know about this. I was fumbling real nervous, and I got over here around Luke 16, and I thought, and I got on the subject, and he lifted up his eyes in hell and cried. Now so I began to preach, and I got to preach, and I felt a little better, and I said, the rich man was in hell, and he cried. That little 3 words, like I have a lot of sermons like that. Believest thou this, and speak to the rock. You've heard me preach, Sam. And then he cried. And I said, there's no children there. Certainly not in hell. Then he cried. I said, there's no flowers there. Then he cried. There's no God there. Then he cried. There's no Christ there. Then he cried. Then I cried. Something got a hold of me. My, oh my. I don't know what happened. Well, I kind of got to myself. I was standing on the outside. Then people got screaming and shouting and crying, and we had an awful time. When I come outside, there's a fellow walked up to me with a great big Texas hat on, big boots. Walked up and said, I'm Elder so-and-so, preacher. Cowboy boots, cowboy clothes on. I thought, well, my seersucker trousers ain't so bad then. So I want you to come down to Texas and hold me a revival. Let me put that down, mister. And I put it down like that. Here come a fellow up with one of these little kind of a golf trousers on, where he used to play golf, they had them little blouse pants. He said, I'm Elder so-and-so from Miami. I like to... My, maybe dressing isn't so much of it. I looked at it and I thought, all right, so I grabbed these things and home I went. Wife met me and she said, why you sound so happy about Billy? I said, oh, I met the cream of the crop. My, it's the best you ever seen. Them people ain't ashamed of their religion, and I told her all about it. I said, and looky here, honey, a whole string of invitations. Them people. He said, they're not holy rollers, are they? I said, I don't know what kind of rollers they are, but they got something that I needed. See, I said, that's one thing, I'm sure. I said, I've seen an old man 90 years old come young again. I said, I never heard such preaching in my life. Why, I never seen a Baptist preach like that. I said, they preach till they get out of breath and bend their knees plumb to the floor and come back up, catch their breath. You can hear them 2 blocks away still preaching. And I said, I never heard such in my life. And I said, they speak in an unknown tongue, and the other one tells what they're talking about. Never heard such in my life. I said, will you go with me? She said, honey, when I married you, I will stick with you until death shall separate us. She said, I'll go. She said, I will tell the folks. And I said, well, you tell your mama, and I'll tell my mama. So I went and told Mama. Mama said, well, sure, Billy, whatever the Lord's called you to do, go do it. And so Miss Brumback asked for me to come up. Well, she said, what's this you're talking about? And I said, oh, Miss Brumback, I said, you ought never seen such people. She said, quieten down, quieten down. I said, yes, ma'am. I said, I'm sorry. And she said, do you know that's a bunch of holy rollers? I said, no, ma'am, I didn't know that. I said, they sure are fine people. She said, the very idea, do you think you'd drag my daughter out amongst stuff like that? Said, ridiculous, that's nothing but trash if the other churches is thrown out. She said, indeed, you'll not drag my daughter out like that. I said, but, Miss Brumback, down in my heart, I feel that the Lord wants me to go with them people. She said, you go back up to your church until they're able to afford a parsonage for you and act like a man's got some sense. Said, you're not taking my daughter out through there. I said, yes, ma'am. I turned around, walked out, and Hope started crying. She came out, she said, Billy, regardless of what Mama says, I'll stay with you. Bless her heart. And I said, oh, that's all right, honey. And I just let it go. She wouldn't let her daughter go with such people as that because it wasn't nothing but trash. And so I just kind of let it go. It was the worst mistake I ever made in my life. One of the worst.
The wheel on the wagon is broken. There's a sign on the ranch for sale. After a few years went by, God blessed their home with 2 lovely children, a son named Billy Paul and a daughter named Sharon Rose. And one day there came up a flood in 1937 on January the 27th in Jeffersonville, Indiana. A high water mark of 22 feet was set at the corner of Court and Spring Street. Brother Branham prophesied 6 months before that this flood would come and reach the height of 22 feet over Spring Street. But what he didn't know was the dark period of his life that would come with the flood, and was responsible for the death of two of those that were the dearest to him in all the world. His wife became very sick with pneumonia, and later TB had set in. One night, while he was on a patrol, he received an important call.
One day I was on patrol and I had my radio turned on, and I thought, I heard him say, make a call on the radio, said, for William Branham, wanted the hospital at once, wife dying. I rushed back to the hospital as quick as I could, turned on the red light and the siren and took off. And then I got up at the hospital and I stopped running, coming down through the hospital. I seen a little buddy of mine that we fished together, we run together as boys. Sam Adair, Dr. Sam Adair, he's the one that was, the vision come not long ago and told him about the clinic. And he said, if anybody doubted the vision, just call him collect, if you want to know about whether it was right or not. And so then, here he come out like that, and he had his hat in his hand. He looked at me, and he just started crying. And I run up to him, throw my arms around him, he put his arms around me, he said, Billy, she's going. He said, I'm sorry, I've done all I could do, I've had specialists and everything. I said, Sam, surely she's not going. He said, yeah, she's going. And he said, don't go in there, Bill. And I said, I've got to go in, Sam. He said, don't do it. Don't, please don't. I said, let me go in. He said, I'll go with you. I said, no, you stay out here. I want to stay with her in her last minute. He said, she's unconscious. I walked in the room, and the nurse was sitting there, and she was crying because she and Hope was schoolmates together. And so I looked over, and she started crying, put her hand up, and started walking over. And I looked over and shook her. There she was. She had went down from about 120 pounds to about 60, and I shook her, and if I live to be 100 years old, I'll never forget what happened. She turned over, and those great, big, pretty eyes looked up at me. She smiled. She said, why did you call me back, Billy? I said, honey, I just got the cast. I had to work. We was way in debt and hundreds of dollars a doctor bill and nothing to pay it with, and I just had to work. And I'd seen her 2 or 3 times a day and every night. And then when she was in that condition, I said, what do you mean call you back? She said, Bill, you've preached about it, you've talked about it, but you don't have no idea what it is. I said, what are you talking about? She said, heaven. She said, look, she said, I was being escorted home by some people's man or women or something that was dressed in white. And she said, I was at ease and peace. She said, big pretty birds flying from tree to tree. She said, don't think I'm beside myself. She said, Billy, I'm going to tell you our mistake. She said, sit down. I didn't. I knelt down, took her hand. She said, you know where our mistake is? And I said, yes, sweetheart, I do. She said, we should have never listened to Mama. Them people were right. I said, I know it. She said, promise me this, that you'll go to those people. Said, because they're right. And she said, raise my children like that. And she said, I want to tell you something. She said, I'm dying. I said, she said, the only thing I hate to leave you, Bill, and I know you got these 2 little children to raise. She said, promise me that you'll not stay single and let my children be pulled about from pillar to post. That's a sensible thing for a 21-year-old mother. And I said, I can't promise that, Hope. She said, please promise me. Said, one thing I want to tell you. Said, you remember that rifle? I'm just crazy about guns. And she said, you wanted to buy that rifle that day and you didn't have enough money to make the down payment? I said, yes. She said, I've been saving my money, my nickels, to try to make that down payment on that rifle for you. She said, now when this is over and you go back home, look up on the duofold, or the folding bed, under that piece of paper on top, and you'll find the money there. She said, promise me that you'll buy that rifle. You don't know how I felt when I seen that $1.75 in nickels laying there. I got the rifle.
The wheel on the wagon is broken. There's a sign on the ranch for sale. Billy continued to talk to his wife, holding her hands until the angels of God packed her away. He went home not knowing what to do. He laid down, and just in a little bit someone called him and said, Billy, and it was Frank Broy. He said, your baby's dying.
And just in a little bit someone called me, said, Billy, there's Brother Frank Broy. He said, your baby's dying. I said, my baby? He said, yes, Sharon Rose. Said, Doc's up there now, and said she's got tubercular meningitis. She nursed it from her mother, and said she's dying. I got in a car, went up there, and there she was, a sweet little thing, and they rushed her to the hospital. I went out to see him. Sam come up and said, Billy, don't you go in that room. You got to think of Billy Paul. Said, she's dying. I said, Doc, I got to see my baby. He said, no, you can't go in. Said, she's got meningitis, Billy. You'd pack it to Billy Paul. And I waited till he got out. I couldn't stand to see her die and her mother laying down there in the undertaker's establishment. I tell you, the way of a transgressor is hard. And I went, slipped in the door, and when Sam went out, the nurse went out, I went out into the basement. It's a little bitty hospital. She's in an isolated place, and the flies is in her little eyes. They had a little, what we call a mosquito bar, a little netting over her eyes. And she'd, with a little spasm, her little fat leg was moving up and down like that, and her little hands with that spasm. And I looked at her, and she's just big enough to be cute, about 8 months old. And her mother used to set her out there with her little 3 corners on, you know, in the yard when I'd come up and I'd toot the horn, and she'd go goo, 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 reaching for me, you know. There laid my darling dying. I looked down to her and I said, Sherry, you know Daddy? You know Daddy, Sherry? And when she looked, she was suffering so hard that one of them pretty little blue eyes had crossed. It like to tore my heart out of me. I knelt down, I said, Lord, what have I done? Have not I preached the gospel on the street corners? I've done everything that I know to do. Don't hold it against me. I never call them people trash. It was her that called them people trash. I said, I'm sorry it all happened. Forgive me. Don't take my baby. And while I was praying, looked like a sheet or cloth come down. I knowed he had refused me. Now there was the hardest and the most treacherous time of my life. When I raised up and looked at her, and I thought, Satan put in my mind, well, you mean as hard as you've preached and the way that you've lived, and now when it comes to your own baby, he'll turn you down. I said, that's right. If he can't save my baby, then I can't. I stopped. I just didn't know what to do. And then I said this, I said, Lord, you gave her to me and you taken her away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. If you take even me, I'll still love you. And I put my hand over on her and I said, bless you, sweetheart. Daddy wanted to raise you with all my heart. I wanted to raise you and raise you to love the Lord. But the angels are coming for you, sweetheart. Daddy will take your little body down and lay it on the arms of Mama. I'll bury you with her. Someday, Daddy will meet you. You just wait up there with Mama. When her mother was dying, she said, last word she said, Bill, stay on the field. I said, if I'm on the field when he comes, I'll get the kids and meet. If I'm not, I'll be buried by you. And you go over on the right-hand side of the great gate, and when you see all of them come in, stand there and start hollering, Bill, 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 just as loud as you can. I'll meet you there. I kissed her goodbye. I'm on the battlefield today. That's been nearly 20 years ago. I got my date with my wife. I'm going to meet her.
The wheel on the wagon is broken. There's a sign on the ranch for sale. It seems like I have lost everything, but I know that all is well. All is well if he sends me to hell. I still love him anyway, and I'll always love him right to the end, even to my dying day, even to my dying